There's nothing more daunting than when you first start recording or producing music because there's so much online. What DAW to use, what gear you need, how to mix stuff, all that stuff. So I have been very fortunate over the years to have become friends with some really top level guys, the guys that like mix Chapel Roan stuff, all like the video game OST stuff. And these are some things that I learned from them, just 5 kind of quick tips that I learned from literally the best people in the world to do it that I never would have figured out on my own and that I just kind of avoided for the longest time. So let's jump right into a session I am working on and let's just listen to just like a few seconds of it real quick.
It's all illusions that I make up, so scared of my own thoughts, scenarios that won't stop.
So I'm just kind of in the middle of this session that I'm working on with my band, just me and my singer Lilu. And first off the bat, I want to go into Lilu's vocal track and just some of the plugins on here, okay? This is a really, really simple one. So this is going to be using EQs stacked, okay? So basically one thing that you should be doing is just, especially on a vocal, even if I were to isolate the vocal right here and you want to take a look at it,
I could have been a little cleaner.
There's nothing really going on under like 200, so you filter that out, right? Maybe you've already seen that. But the thing is, the next thing is an 1176 model, something modeled after vintage gear. These are becoming all the rage nowadays. And the thing that I didn't realize is that once you put one of these vintage gear modelers on there, after that, you're gonna wanna filter the low end out again, okay? Something that I never even thought of is like, well, if I'm not putting anything under 400, 300, 200 hertz into it, why would it add something back later? Well, it's modeling what the actual hardware unit did, and sometimes that will actually reintroduce some like sub frequencies and like low end back into your chain, even though you've already filtered it. So that's like a super easy one to do. Anytime you use some kind of like analog vintage modeler, put another EQ after that, even if you're just kind of cleaning up the low end. So that's something you can do right now that I know all the big guys do. So that's an easy one, right? Another way to kind of look at stacking things would be stacking compressors, okay? Compressors is probably like the number one misunderstood thing. It's like, oh, you gotta compress a vocal, you gotta compress everything super tight. There are a couple different ways to use compression. We could talk for hours and hours and hours just about compression, but a very simple one to do would be, let me bring 2 different types of compressors up right now. I'll do that Arturia one and also just like the stock Logic one, right? So I'll have these back to back. Again, the one on the left goes first, the one on the right goes second. So if I'm just looking at the vocal,
Could have been a little cleaner, could have said it a little better so I can be.
What you want to do is you really want to watch these meters and adjusting the input and the threshold at which you hit it, because I don't like having tons and tons of decibel reduction. And again, most people kind of do this in a row, right? Like, so rather than like squeezing off like an insane amount of decibels with one compressor, it sounds much more natural just to do them compressors in a row. So even if you just look at the waveform of Lilu's vocal here, she actually sent it as a stereo thing because she recorded it remotely, so don't worry about that. But this is a pretty even one. I think she actually kind of tracked into a compressor to go here. So that first compressor is really only kicking in on the peaks, right? So like this part here.
Illusions that I make up, so scared of my own thoughts, scenarios that won't stop.
So you can kind of see how this isn't a super dynamic vocal, but even then you want one compressor to kind of take care of just like the transients and the peaks, and the other one just to like level out the entire sound. Sometimes, like again, in this one, because she tracked into a compressor on the way in, this is actually 3 stages of compression, and then at the end, another bus compressor to kind of tie everything else in together, right? The next thing I want to talk about is using percussion creatively. So the way that we started writing this one is she sent me a loop. The loop sounded like this. Here, I'll do this. Let me bring it up. So cool sounding loop is just off of Splice. If you're working with splice loops, you want to kind of mess with it because you never know who might take that exact same loop. Again, Sabrina Carpenter famously used a splice loop that became like the biggest song of the year. So you want to make it unique in some way. What I really like for percussion is this Arturia plugin called Mix Drums. So here it is without it, and then with it. Now, the thing about percussion is you want it to change a little bit. As a cool sounding loop, I really like the vibe of it. What we're gonna use is Fader's website. So I'm gonna go to Fader, I have a subscription there, and I'm going to stem out that loop that I already downloaded from Splice and I already kind of messed with to kind of give it a lo-fi vibe, right? So I'm gonna take my track and I'm just gonna drag it here, okay? It's uploaded to the Fader website. And it has stemmed out the track. Now, the cool thing about the premium subscription is you can actually increase the amount of stems for just drums. So I'm just gonna separate the drums from my initial stem, and then it's gonna give me even more kind of power. What it's gonna do is it's gonna take that splice clip and it's gonna break apart, like, the hi-hat, the kick, the snare into different tracks that I can re-import into my project session, and then I can start bringing things in and out. See, so now if I just wanna hear the snare, or the kick. So now that I have a separation of the hi-hat, the kick, and the snare, I can re-import these into Logic and then actually make them into different tracks, because then I have the ability to start bringing things in and out, maybe putting different effects on individual tracks instead of just the whole splice loop, because usually you got something going on with low frequency of a kick, the high frequency of hi-hats and snares. And if you really try to mess with it too much, it becomes kind of hard to deal with. So really cool tool with Fader to be able to take splice loops and then separate them into the individual drum parts, because you're gonna wanna do a lot more with it, which brings us to our next tip, and that is simplifying your mix, okay? I'm a multi-instrumentalist, so one thing that I am for sure guilty of is, just because I can play guitar and synth and keyboard and drums, whatever, I want to do it for basically everything in my track. If I zoom out here for the project, you'll see that a lot of the stuff is actually cut out in the middle. For instance, the intro will have like an acoustic guitar part. Which I thought sounded pretty cool, but it's like, all right, well, take that away from the verse, and then even take it away from the first chorus, and then bring it back in. So it's really just bringing things in and out that is something you're gonna wanna kind of work on. I remember when I first started, and a lot of this is automated too, so even if it's not muted on the Logic screen, it actually does come down and come back up. But really simplifying how many things you have going on at one time, I think is a very super important thing, especially for performances that last the duration of the song. That's why it's cool if you're a multi-instrumentalist, or you're tracking like a musician that is able to kind of like give you a bunch of takes and comps. Get as much as you can, but then, just kind of do it reasonably without having it be too busy. So that's the cool thing about stemming out pieces, because it gives you the option of maybe bringing, all right, I just want the hi-hat, I'm gonna bring the kick and the snare out. This section for the verse is just gonna be the hi-hat. Always have things changing, right? Even if you're like live playing a synth, when you're playing, mess with the filter cutoff, automate all that stuff, because the more interesting that you can make a mix tastefully, I think the more engaged your listener is gonna be, instead of just having a single splice loop go over and over and over and over and over again. The next one, and this might be the most important one, is work to a reference track, right? So everybody, you'll be shocked at how much better your ears get over time. I remember that like even just listening to music casually that like I love, like I remember I'm a huge Elliott Smith fan, for instance, right? Like when I was in college and I was listening to Elliott Smith, I was like, this is perfect music. And then after engineering albums and working on music and kind of honing my ears a little bit, it's like, oh wow, there's some imperfections in these early recordings that aren't tasteful, they're just bad, and now they bother me. For instance, there's like a snare ring in the song Alameda that I can't unhear now. So your ears do get better over time. One way to actually speed that process up is to mix to a reference track, okay? So just buy something off of Apple Music or whatever, put it in your Logic session or Pro Tools session or Ableton session, and then be able to see visually. There's a lot of analyzers, there's like a lot of stuff on like Plugin Alliance where you can actually take a reference track and you can match EQ a reference track. If you guys have questions about that, if you want to see me do a video on match EQ specifically, let me know in the comments. But it is so valuable to be able to hear in the same session something in the same vein or genre of what you're trying to do versus what you are actually doing. So to be able to go back and A/B those really quickly, I think is something that is super underrated and everybody should be doing on every mix. Again, the best professionals in the world who do this time and time again, who you would think might not need something like that, still always use reference tracks on basically every project that they work on in my experience in the projects that I've seen people doing, right? So, quick recap. Multi-stage EQ to filter out high or low end if you're using any kind of analog emulation or plugins or effects and stuff like that. Serial stack your compressors to kind of get a more even sound in general. Get creative with your percussion, stem it out, have it come in, have it go back. Simplify all your recordings. Again, less is almost always more when it comes to the amount of busyness in the mix, and it'll make your life as a mixing engineer so much easier, just completely eliminating an instrument for a part instead of trying to like force its way into a sonic frequency spectrum and then use a reference track. So thanks for watching. Let me know if you guys have any more questions or if you want me to elaborate on anything I've talked about in this video, and I will see you all in the next one.